Welcome, Penny, to Unbroken. It is truly an honor for me to have you here. I have read some of your work. You're a prolific writer, researcher. There's so much that I have learned from you. And so I really wanted to have you here so that my viewers could learn some of the things that I've learned from you. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I have to say, I think the title of this program is perfect, Unbroken, because that's how I see our civilization. That's the mindset that we have to have as a civilization, that we are unbroken. And, we've had some assaults and a little bit of battery over the last few years, and we are unbroken. So.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And to me, an unbroken person is someone who has, been affected by all the things in our reality that can hold us down and harm us, but heals and goes forward and tries to do whatever we all can to improve this world.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you do that through all the teachings that you do. And so one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about is consciousness. Okay. This is a topic that I think is very important for all of us to understand so that we can grow our consciousness and get to the point where we transition into a better reality. So I was just wondering if you could explain for people even just start with what is it? What is consciousness?
Wow, that's a big subject, Matt. If I had to nutshell it, I would say we have to get into a little bit of physics. And for people that are afraid of science, don't be afraid of science. If somebody makes it clear, then it's easy to grasp. So consciousness is a state of a space. Okay, so we live in this gigantic space called the cosmos, and that space is also a gigantic mind. And when you go into that, when you have a full-blown Kundalini awakening, and you step into that space, mind space, then you experience this tremendous, mind-blowing is probably too light a description of this mind-blowing love and this extraordinary understanding of what is the core of existence. And it's the ability to say, I am. That's all that mind does. And it's very still. That mind space, it doesn't move. It's quiet, it's absolutely silent, but there's this bliss there. And so when that space starts to move, it transitions from pure awareness to consciousness. And that consciousness is what we then work with for our whole life. So it becomes it enters other stages. There are many, many stages of existence and states of consciousness. I don't even say states of consciousness, states of being in which consciousness transitions as it moves up to higher and higher states of being. But the base is consciousness, and that's where everything is created from, right there. So one more thing. Let me interrupt and say one more thing. So when you ask what is consciousness, it's actually the frequencies that space devolves into once it starts to move. That's it in a nutshell. Okay, and the frequency, whether it's a big frequency, big amplitude, that kind of thing. Or whether it's little, tiny, high frequency, that determines what your perception is going to be. It also determines the characteristics of the particles that those waves produce. So that's consciousness. It's not a woo-woo kind of thing, even though a lot of people present it that way. So
it's actually very scientific.
It is.
It's measurable and studyable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And when you measure it and you study it and you begin to see that, oh, this frequency always produces this kind of perception and this attitude, you begin to realize how powerful the ability to shift your consciousness becomes. So, because it changes everything about your existence.
Yeah. So when you say frequency, it makes me think of, people talk about being in low frequency and higher frequency.
Yeah.
And, I can feel, for example, if I'm angry, right?
Oh,
It
yeah.
feels a very specific way.
Yep.
And what I've noticed is if I'm in that state, it seems to me that I pull that state from others towards me as well. So it seems to be its own little reality bubble. Whereas if I can take myself out of that anger, and the way I do, the easiest way for me is to think of something I'm grateful for. And then if I'm in that frequency of gratitude, it seems like things go really well for me,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if you could explain what is that?
There's a law it's a dimensional law. If you're in any given dimension and you have a certain frequency state, the law is that likes attract.
Uh-huh.
In the third dimension, opposites attract, and that's there's a lot of evidence of that, etc. But when you start moving around to other dimensions, and even from this dimension, you stay here, but you operate at a higher frequency set. It's kind of like moving up the piano an octave or two.
Uh-huh.
Then you begin to attract to yourself whatever it is you are experiencing.
So could I ask you a little bit about the different dimensional realities or frequencies, if you could explain that? So, for example, the only thing out there that people are talking about is that New Age version, which to me is a program, right? It's a program to keep us stuck. So I know that they describe it that you suddenly magically go into some 5D, but that's not the way I understand it. I think it's an internal thing. Is that right?
Yes, it is. No, there's no magical 5D. So you're quite right. When you go into another set of frequencies, whether you move up, down, or over, what you have is a different set of perceptions and different feelings and different capacities. And you will also have different DNA. So there are lots and lots of changes that occur. A dimension is simply a range of frequencies within which a reality system can unfold. It has to be wide enough to accommodate whatever the people or beings or plants, because everything is conscious and everything creates. It is the nature of consciousness to create a reality. And so when you have a wide enough range of frequencies, you have quite an interesting reality system. And that is what people refer to when they talk about a dimension. When you go into a different range of frequencies, then you have entirely different experience. And a perfectly good example of that, people say, oh, I don't know how to do that. I'm like, oh, yes, you do. Because every night when you go to sleep, you leave the body. Consciousness does not shut off. It never is off. And so you end up going to create or join other ranges of frequency that will keep you interested and entertained. And consciousness loves drama. It loves all manner of excitement and movement and motion. That is the base nature of consciousness, is movement, motion. And so you go in, you have what you call a dream. It's really not a dream at all. It's another experience that you have in another frequency set or range of frequencies. And each one has their own set of rules, their own physics, and we are quite familiar with those. So when I'm teaching classes, I tell people right off the bat, if there's one thing you want to do to expand your consciousness. It is learn to remember your dreams. And that expands your consciousness right there. Because once you begin to look at those dreams, then you begin to say, what was that about? And then you have to understand the language of energy. And once you understand the language of energy, then you can really go anywhere, anywhere in any of the systems, especially the humanoid systems, and really understand kind of how they're using energy to create their system. So it's a different way of looking at the reality that we're in. Most people just, get up in the morning and go through their day and go to bed at night and sleep and get up the next day, etc. But when you're involved in research into consciousness, then you get a whole different point of view and an understanding of the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And it's very, very interesting.
So you're saying essentially that dreams are just another version of reality that we travel in or we interact in.
That's right. Okay. That's right. And when you're in those states, those places, and you recall this one, it's like this one is a dream. So
I've spent some time living with a tribe and studying with some shamans in the Peruvian Amazon, and they would tell me that this is a dream. This reality is a dream.
Yes. Yeah, very good. It is in every sense of the word. We create it as we go along. It's a little slower manifesting, but we're making it. We're making it in terms of what we envision, in terms of how we respond, in terms of the reactions that we draw from others. All of that goes into unfolding that timeline as it moves forward.
So, that seems like a very important statement that you made, that that via our consciousness, we create reality. Because if that is so, then collectively here on this planet, we are responsible for the reality that exists, right? That we are co-creating this. I mean, we've been influenced. So I understand that our minds have been controlled and influenced to create a reality that some people want us to inhabit. But nevertheless, we're creating it though, right?
Yes, and I would add, excuse me, you and I and, the cat and the tree and the cows and the geese and etc. Excuse me. Everybody is creating. It's, people take that sentence, you're creating your reality, and then they feel bad if they had a bad experience and they say, no, I didn't want that cancer, or I didn't want that car accident, or I had no desire to, make that thing happen that killed my child or whatever. But you're not the only one creating. Okay. And so what really has to be taken into account is situational awareness. What have you gotten yourself into? Where are you at? And the courage to walk away, to hide oneself. And when you don't have the means to do that, you're stuck until you can walk away or figure out a mechanism for countering whatever is happening, the grief, for instance, or the fear of the cancer or whatever it is. So it's a piece of work to be in a three-dimensional system. And one of the things I have to say about this particular system that we're in right now is that there's quite a few people here from other places that are just anchoring and kind of, what would I call it, like demonstrating how to walk forward in spite of an incredible load of crap that happened, or, an ungodly amount of setbacks and problems and challenges and injustices and things like that. And they just move forward, and they show others This is how you do it. And when you do that, when you can do that, you develop this extraordinary, what I call like first base of power in consciousness, because consciousness is the bottom line.
Yeah.
It is the tool, it is the reality, it is the system itself that we're in. How do you navigate that?
Yeah.
And when you have had tremendous troubles,
Yeah.
you have this really firm base that says, no, don't do that, do this.
Yeah.
And you get to this place where you say, because I said so. You have this immovable will. And you hold that, win, lose, or draw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with what you're speaking about because that was my life. And I actually remember choosing to come here. And so I don't remember where I came from, but I remember being in a meeting and scouting here and seeing a timeline of, destruction, and then raising my hand and volunteering, which admittedly at times I have regretted. But
Can't
but
imagine why.
but I came in and, for whatever reasons, I incarnated in a situation, in a family that, was involved in the cabal and in these kinds of dark practices. And so really starting at birth, I was tortured. The attachment bond with my mother was broken. And, I've been taken in, my uncle ran this underground facility, which did experiments and torture and all kinds of things. And I was trafficked. It was connected with underground tunnels to the bottom part of the Vatican, where I was also trafficked out of. And so I remember being very, very small and looking around and feeling like, oh my God, it is so dark here. It is so violent. Like it was a shock to my system.
Yeah.
And at those small ages, I could understand and communicate with animals. I would hear the trees talking to each other. I could see flowers breathing.
Yeah.
That was my normal reality. And then it was juxtaposed against, this kind of harshness. And so it's interesting because, so sometimes I would be put in cages or boxes for a length of time. Well, when I was in there, I wasn't there. I was somewhere else that was beautiful.
Right.
There would be a waterfall. I was particularly fond of dolphins, elephants, and lions. I would have animals there. And often I would be talking with Jesus. I mean, I was raised Catholic, so I consider, it doesn't really matter the name, but it was an energetic being. And that's how I got through a lot of that, is that when I was put through these things, I was somewhere else. I don't exactly know how to explain that myself, but maybe you can.
Yeah, that's common. In fact, that's how I first experienced, maybe not the first time, but really very aware of, I'm not staying here for this. So, and just getting to this point where now I work with a lot of people, and I have for 40 years worked with people. And I remember way back when, oh gosh, might have been the mid 90s, 1990s, somebody coming into an appointment and saying, I had all this Satanist kind of stuff happening, and she's rattling off all these things. And I'm like, what? Because I had this ideal childhood and could not imagine that. I did not have such a great marriage. My first marriage was not so hot. And so it was this shock of, are you making this up? Well, then there were another couple women who came in, two sisters, and they had similar stories. First one came in, and then when I listened to her, she said, you need to talk to my sister. Same kind of thing, awful stuff happening, rapes, childhood torture, things like that. And so at that point I thought, okay, and all three of them said, I learned how to go out of body so I wouldn't be present for what was happening. And that ended up being like a familiar refrain. I ended up working with 6 or 7 different people who had all had that same kind of experience. Plus, I know 1 or 2 others that have talked about that a little bit, but they haven't been my clients. And all same thing. They learned how to project consciousness where they needed it to be in order to survive, and just not be present for whatever was happening. And that is the basis, kind of the basis of what we call temporary insanity. When the pain centers in the brain get stimulated, first thing that happens is like, ooh, where is that coming from? And you try to avoid a little bit. If the stimulation continues, it becomes irritation, and then it becomes frustration, and then anger, and then fear, and then rage, and then temporary insanity, which is, I might have to hurt somebody, and I don't want to know that I am hurting anyone, and so we split right there. And that becomes a useful tool. And it's interesting you mentioned talking with elephants, because the elephant is one of the symbols of, I will retain my ability to put myself back together again. So that's a very important skill. If you split yourself and you can't come back together, then you have multiple personality disorder.
Right.
If you only have one version of yourself and you try to use that for everything, then you have singular personality disorder, and neither one of them works very well. So we all have a variety of selves. And, we act one way with our spouse, and another with our child, and another with our boss or our teacher or our friend or whatever. And all of those different selves, each one very, very fluid, very flexible, and remembers all the others.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. In interviewing people that have been through satanic ritual abuse, like I have, several of them have split, and they do have multiple personalities. Yeah. I do not, but I really resonate with what you're saying, because I have different parts of me. And right. So I've gotten to know them all. I've healed them. And so when I'm in one, I'm conscious of it, and I talk to that part of me and bring it to a place, where things will go forward in a positive way. So that makes perfect sense to me. And that's how I actually work with people. I tell people we're not an I, we're more of a we.
That's right. That is so true. Yeah. And when you get into the very high states of consciousness, that awareness of that we-ness, and that ability to flex and be fluid and get beyond the box that most people live in, that becomes a natural state or a natural way. And people in high states of consciousness often talk of, they very seldom say I. They often, almost always say we. We think this, we think that, we will do this, we would not recommend that, and da-da-da. So yeah.
Something else that I'm curious about that I would do as a child is, I would wake up in the morning and be a little bit disappointed that I was here still. But sometimes, depending on what's happening, like I would watch water running, and I would focus on it so intently that in a moment I was the water. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, that is how we know, quote, KNOW. And so when we meet somebody new, for instance, the first thing that we do is jump out of the body, become that person for just a split second, and then come back to the self, bringing the knowledge of that individual back with us. And now we know them a little bit. And the more we talk with them, work with them, hang around them, the more we know and understand the deeper stuff that we didn't pick up the first time. Yes. And that happens with houses, with cars, with trees, with water. Water is a big thing. With every object in your house, there's this identification with it. in order to know it, and yet we don't acknowledge that. And so we have a sort of an unawakened civilization or group of people forming a civilization that's kind of walking in their sleep a lot.
Yeah.
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 Unfortunately, we need to wake up.
Yes, that was about, you took the words right out of my mouth. We need to
Yeah.
wake up.
Yeah, right.
So how do we wake up, in your opinion?
It would be nice if we had an educational system that was devoted to waking us up. It
Right.
would be fabulous if we had parents who really were interested in parenting and devoted to that, and knew how to create an exceptional, extraordinary human being. And we don't have either one of those. And then the result is we have in this particular dimension, can we talk about sex for a moment?
Absolutely.
We have this runaway sexual habit, or these runaway sexual habits, in which that's just about the only freedom that we really have to do at will. And we use it. And the result is we have children all over the place, but nobody's taking care of the children. And that, I think, is a crime. It's criminal. If you're going to have a child, if you're in another system of high consciousness beings, highly evolved beings, you may not have a child just because you want one. You have to go through all kinds, years of training and development, and maybe then you can have a part-time child, but you're not allowed to raise any kind of individual who will be dysfunctional or defective in any way. And that's what we have here. There's a whole lot of people that are really unhappy, and that is considered a dysfunction. It's a triggering of the wrong side of the pain pleasure centers in the hypothalamus, and that is tragic. We end up then with all kinds of misery and sorrow and injustices and what have you. Education could be designed to bring out the magic and the potential in every single human being. They would be fully developed, intelligent, capable, self-sufficient beings by the time they were 10 or 12. We baby our children until they're 20 or 30 or 40, etc. There's just a whole lot of mistakes that we're making in terms of the way that we reproduce ourselves. And that's too bad. It's really too bad. And then we cry when our child gets hurt or, doesn't talk to us anymore because they're mad from something we did when they were 6 or whatever. It's a system that needs a complete overhaul. Yeah. So, and then on top of that, we have bad food that really contributes to the lowest consciousness. Yes. We have a system of injustice out there in terms of finance and governance and all kinds of ignorance around things like racial qualities or all of those. It's ridiculous.
I call it being raised in a cult,
Yeah.
It's set up intentionally to keep us from whatever that natural developmental process would be. And right. and you're right, you go through it. There's this feeling that I have a daughter, so there's this feeling that I notice parents have as their child, when they're very small, they're so pure and innocent and beautiful. And in my opinion, the way we really organically are. And then, yes. Every parent has said this, like they have this sorrow that their child will grow to a certain age and then have to deal with the quote real world, right? And it's that reality that then it takes something away. And I've seen that too. Now, with my daughter, I was actually 38 years old when I got pregnant. I was using birth control and somehow I became impregnated against all odds. But I had dreamt about it prior, that I was going to have a child, but I didn't get the dream. I thought it was a metaphor for my inner child or something. But then, then all of a sudden,
Right.
there I am pregnant, and
Yep.
I dreamt she came to me in a dream, told me what to name her. So I did.
Yep.
And then I was just, one of my biggest instincts was I quit working to raise her because of my experiences, I had to be the one. I wasn't going to leave her with anybody else.
Oh,
And
very good.
I'm very pleased that I chose to do that. She's 18 now. And when she was about 2, we were living in San Francisco in an upper flat. And she said, we were home, and she said, "Mama, I want to go home." And I said, "Oh, where is that?" And she took me to the window and she pointed up. And she said, "We came from there, Mama," right? So I was always very aware not to sort of crush any of that,
Yes.
And then when she was 3 and we were driving somewhere, I almost crashed because she said, "Mama, can I come through you again? Can I get born from you again?" she says. And I said, I misunderstood her. And I said, "Well, once you come out, you can't go back in." And she said, "No, Mama, the next time."
Oh, wow.
And I thought, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
And when she was around 4 and I told her that she couldn't do something, she became very, upset with me. And she put her hands on her hips and she said, "But Mama, why do you get to tell me what to do? I should be the one telling you what to do." She says, "I'm older than you."
Oh.
And I said, "Well, maybe you are an older soul, and maybe that's true. But in this body, in this lifetime, I'm older than you, and it's my job to raise you and guide you. But that doesn't mean that what you're saying, is wrong." And she would accept it if I gave her explanations for things.
Yep.
And explained. She would absolutely accept it. And, in all her teenage years, I have had no issue with her. We have a great relationship. I mean, granted, she wants to spend most of her time with her friends, but I'm very grateful that whatever I did, somehow I did it pretty well.
Very good.
Yeah, there's a great love there.
Yeah.
And as you know, because you have children,
Yeah.
that is the most profound love I have ever felt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's a very small taste of what we could experience for the entire reality and everybody out there. But we just can't seem to get ourselves together enough to design and implement systems that would bring those kinds of results. And I think we need a different sort of, I have a whole different, I'll call it system of childhood or human development that I use when I'm working with people. I can tell where did they stall out, what stage were they at that didn't get completed, because completed or not, you continue to move to the next stage, bringing whatever accomplishments you've been able to muster as you move through each phase, and that it doesn't stop. Even at death, we should be preparing one another to move into the next life. And we have these stories about heaven and hell and scare the daylights out of people. And it's like, okay, why don't we grow up? That's like the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus kind of story.
Right.
There are many, many levels of life, and we're starting to blend some of the dimensions around us that are a little bit less dense. We're starting to blend with them. We're starting to communicate with them a little more clearly. We have technology now that will do that as well. And I think it's really important to expand our ideas and our understanding of what are we doing here, and what does this place offer us. And I think one of the big things it offers is a chance to create, because consciousness creates, and then be stuck with what we created until we decide to change it. And that's the goal, is, okay, make this decision, live with it a little bit, evaluate it. If it doesn't work, make a new decision. And somehow we fall down right there. We don't evaluate, and I think part of the reason we don't is because we're not allowed to cycle through the natural cycle of consciousness cycles that occur from, morning till evening. We go through a series of cycles. But if you have to stay in beta consciousness all the time, that's outwardly directed. There's no chance for reflection in there.
So that's interesting. So there's cycles of consciousness even within a day.
Yeah, we move through 3 or 4 cycles over the course of the day, or in fact over the course of the night, and they're made in such a way. Those cycles are very, very. They have a lot of common sense behind them. The beta is the outward focused one. Alpha is kind of this dual focus. Awareness of what's outside, and then an awareness of what's going on inside you, like I'm hungry, or I need to go to the bathroom, or I need a cup of coffee, or it's time for me to do such and such, and I really don't feel like doing that, but I guess I'll go do it. There's this inner outer awareness of what we are experiencing and then what the world is requiring, and that's alpha. And then down in theta, that's internally directed. And we should go down into theta for 15, 20 minutes out of each cycle just to kind of, okay, what do I really think about that? What do I really feel about that? What really makes sense? What has to happen here? We don't do that. And then, you can't spend any time in delta, which is, totally internal. There's no outward perception at all because the body's busy healing. And then we cycle up again, up into high beta. It's when we're all upset about something. And then you get up into gamma. You're in an altered state, definitely at that point. But we are pretty much, because of the corporate lifestyle, we have to stay in beta. If you're in your car, you better be in beta so that you don't run into anybody or cause any harm, that kind of thing. So we have this lifestyle that demands one form of consciousness, and that it's exhausting, and people are tired and they wonder why. So 5 minutes in theta is worth a nap. So it's worth an hour and a half nap.
So would theta or be the consciousness in meditation, for example?
It can be, yes. You can go down into the lower ranges, or you can go up, or I actually split and go in both directions, and it's hard to go up. It's hard on the body, but you get better information up there, and so it's useful if you know how to split, and the body goes into lower alpha and consciousness goes up into gamma. So, and then you have access to the best of both worlds. So there's a lot that I think would be helpful for people to understand about consciousness if we want to understand the nature of development of the human, how to use consciousness to best effect, and then how to understand, okay, where did I stall out? What do I need to do here that I could correct, or get the wisdom from that awful thing that happened to me and bring that wisdom forward, and so that it has no more charge, but I have all the benefits of that wisdom and that experience. And we don't do that either. We get caught up in blame, and then we spin and cycle and spin, and it's like,
blame is a big trap.
Yeah, it is.
When you were talking, I thought of a question, and what do you think about the use of plants to alter consciousness? There's things like mushrooms or ayahuasca or these kinds of things. What about that? Because there's a lot of confusion. Some people say, oh, it's wonderful. Some people say it's dangerous. Just curious what you think.
What I would say is, let's back up. Every single thing you put in your mouth affects your consciousness. Every single food or drink is either loaded with minerals and vitamins, or it's not, and what's in it is going to impact you. And you need certain minerals in order to have certain feelings. So one of my favorite examples is if you don't have enough magnesium in your system, you typically don't want to be touched. You don't want to be touched. If you don't have enough iron in your system, you don't want to do anything physical. You'll do mental stuff, but you don't want that. Every single mineral has its accompanying perception. If you don't have enough zinc, you won't smell. The sense of smell is gone. So you have to understand, or what I try to get people to understand is everything you put in your mouth alters your consciousness and takes your energy. Now, when it comes to plants like marijuana, ayahuasca, psilocybin, I don't know what some of the others are, but those are gifts from the universe that say, here's an opportunity, here's an aid or an assistant to get through the door to understand the nature of consciousness a little better. I've had very few of those experiences, but I would love to have some more. And that, I think when I talk to people who have had a whole range of stuff, ayahuasca, psilocybin, and they talk about this astounding perception in which they see all life as these moving light forms. I'm aware of being able to see that without the drug or without the plant. And so it's clear to me that those are assistants from Mother Nature that are designed to help us evolve and get to higher states, more evolved states of awareness. And the government has made most of them illegal, and so we can't use them. So here we are mucking around, spinning, going in circles.
I remember when I was in graduate school studying the drug class schedule that the government puts out, and interestingly, all those types of plant substances that would open your consciousness are the most dangerous according to them. But then, their pharmaceuticals and alcohol, things like that are fine, which, I know that to be the absolute opposite, right?
It is true. That is exactly right. And the side effects of some of those drugs are horrendous. And alcohol, oh my gosh, people substitute that for food, and that's disastrous. So yeah, we do have it backwards. It's too bad.
Yeah, in my youth, when I came to the United States when I was 18, and I went to college, and I got drunk like everybody else and did all the crazy stuff and everything.
I know.
And I remember, being so drunk various times that I didn't remember anything for segments of time, right? And now when I look back, what I think is that perhaps when it's like you're actually not there, and maybe some darker entity has come in and is inhabiting you and acting through you.
Well, that can happen. There are, this is a whole different area. There are uncountable numbers of other forms of being. Yeah. Some of them very dark, some of them very light, some of them don't give a darn about our particular range of frequencies and the forms that are milling around in that. But some are looking for a chance to get back in a body, and they will take over. And there have been instances of a single body being used and two different consciousnesses sharing that body, until one of them either gives up, grows up, or changes. But that was documented years ago, I think in Indiana. A young woman died, maybe she was 14 or 15, and all of a sudden across town, she appears in the body of a 14 or 15-year-old who belonged to another family and insisted that she was going back home to live with her real parents. And they struggled with that for a while and finally said, okay, let's make a deal. You can have the body for 6 months and then change out for another 6 months. And they did that for many, many years. And that's not something that we read about or hear about. But there can be a takeover. You can allow somebody to speak through you. although channeling is not really that as
Right.
much as people say it is. Channeling is just a higher version of yourself at a
Right.
higher frequency set.
Yeah. No, I have actually seen this phenomenon in a dark way. I actually believe that my uncle, I know that the people that I grew up with, they would actually do satanic rituals and invite an entity to
Yes.
take them over.
Yeah.
And I've witnessed these rituals, and the main thing that I remember is a feeling of being incredibly cold. Like it was
Yeah.
brutally cold when that would be occurring.
Yeah, that is true. If the coldness occurs, then there really is an exchange that's taking place. If that doesn't occur, then the person invoking the what would I call it? The other negative entity to come in and take over is really just setting up an excuse for themselves and saying it wasn't really me.
Right.
And because we have multiple versions of ourselves, a couple of years ago, maybe more than a couple now, it's more like 5 or 10, there was a young guy, I think his name was Matthew Shepard. He was a gay man. He was
Yeah.
killed by some guys who dragged him out of a bar, dragged him behind a car, tied him to a fence post out in the prairie or the pasture or somewhere, and beat him. And when they came to trial, the guy who had kind of taken the lead in that brutality said, the whole time this was unfolding, I don't know what got into me. It was like I was watching from over there and somebody else was doing all of that. And I thought, that's the part of yourself that you nurtured as an unloving, biased, bully, prejudiced person who had a chance to take over and did.
Yeah.
And shove the version of the self that had some common sense out of the way.
Yep.
That does happen.
Yeah. That brings me to a question. So I've been reading some of your story. I'm not all the way through, but I've been reading about your process of kind of awakening and the psychic abilities that sort of came in.
Yeah.
And wow, it's really remarkable that
Yeah.
you were an engineer, you were very left brain, you were very much in this reality. And so I wonder if you would describe kind of what that was like for you, because I bet that many people will have that experience, and it took you a while to figure out what was going on as I'm reading your words. And so I was just wondering if you'd share what that was like and what it really is to be psychic.
Yeah. Okay. So I never describe myself as psychic, but other people do. So I'll just say that there comes that built into the human being is this mechanism that is, when triggered, allows the energy of the entire source system, the entire mind space system, to flow through you. And when that occurs, it is a roaring, shaking, and I do mean literally shaking. I thought that we were having an earthquake, and it was me. And so this event that roars up through the center of you like a freight train, it sounded like a freight train on its way through the middle of me, just roaring sound. And it erases your consciousness that you have had up to that point, and it carries you right into a full-blown experience of the Godhead, source, whatever you want to call that stuff that we're made of. And that's bliss. When you're in that, you do not know yourself as an individual. You do not have a husband or kids. You don't know anything about houses or feeding the dog or paying the bills or your job or anything. And so this this thing occurs. My favorite example is like if you were a submarine and you were 200 feet down below the surface and somebody poked a hole in the side of the submarine, that energy, boom, flows through you like a roaring waterfall, just blows that sub apart. That's similar to what happens when Kundalini occurs, which is the full spontaneous awakening of consciousness to its source, which is that Godhead. So you experience that, and when that energy roars through you, it changes, it rewires you. And it makes you, so there's some effects. The first 3 years were the worst. But it took 17 years before I figured out, okay, I think I'm okay. So, and I learned how to manage the consciousness. But those first 3 years, when consciousness has awakened in you, every single cell in your system is fully conscious, and consciousness has no need to sleep. So I did not sleep for 3 years.
Wow.
I had full consciousness with no boundaries. It didn't matter who I was looking at or where I was or what I was curious about. I had the answer. I could look at somebody and see all of their past lives and I could read their minds. I knew just everything. It's absolutely mind-boggling to have to try to deal with that. It's so distressing. And then, and I'm trying to figure out what went wrong in this event, this roaring, shaking. It results in this series of orgasms that occurs all through the body and then blows your mind apart. You have an orgasm in your head. And then you're in that bliss and you just hang there. And then when you come back, you watch everything, reform as matter. And so I had all of these experiences, this consciousness without boundaries, these clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. I could smell things and people on the other side of the earth. All I had to do was focus on them. I could taste things without putting them in my mouth, things like that. And so that was incredibly intense and really frightening for about the first 3.5 years. And then it started to slow down a little bit, and the roaring, the orgasmic blast in the brain, that kind of came down to a low roar, and this buzzing sound. And eventually, I came across somebody's description of Kundalini and thought, oh my God, that's what happened to me. That's, why? And there's not really any reason why. There's a couple things I could speculate on. One is that I stepped into a moment where I was 100% totally present, without any boundaries, without any barriers, without any do's and don'ts, without any thoughts, without anything. And as soon as that's what gave that energy the opportunity to move through. All of my barriers were down, and I was totally present and loved it. Just absolutely totally present. And that, that just any time that I really relaxed and enjoyed, even if I was just looking at a sunset or something, that whole thing would start up again. That energy would start trying to move through. It took a long time to be able to, you don't ever really control it, but to get used to it or to recognize that that's going to start up again. And it does, start and stop. Even now, after 43 years, it starts and stops on its own. And each time it starts up, there's an expansion of your abilities. Now, I didn't have anybody to teach me. I didn't know. I was just afraid back then. But I developed my own set of observations. I just used the scientific method from, my engineering background, which was, observe, what's common to each one of those situations, and then see if you can manage that. And that ended up being something that was very, very helpful. And I began to learn without all of the, I'll call it the guru type input.
Mhm.
And that saved me from a whole lot of BS, to be honest. I don't want to take away from anybody's guru. And I don't really want to be anybody's guru for that matter. I want everybody to be their own guru. But the thing that I began to study was I left Chrysler and I went back to school to study the brain and consciousness, and got involved in research, and spent 15 years studying consciousness in terms of plasma physics in a lab over in Ann Arbor, and began to really connect with the people that I was with before I came here. Kind of like you were talking about. I remember saying, okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so all of that I began to realize so many things. I began to put pieces together. I'm still putting pieces together. I'm still learning. And so each one of my books has been an attempt to share, okay, this is what I've learned so far. This is what I've put together at this point in time. And it's a deep, deep understanding now of consciousness and how it works. And of what, to go back to the question of what does it mean to be psychic, it simply means that you have developed a fluidity with your ability to shift your own brain to match any set of frequencies you want to match and pick up the information there. And that's what psychic ability is. It's just you matching a set of frequencies and then able to understand what that frequency set is conveying. And that's what I call the language of energy. Sometimes it appears as a form. Sometimes it's just pure information that comes to you gratis.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've had some experiences where I've just called them a download, and it's
Very
really
good.
true. It only happens when I'm really in the present moment.
That's right.
And really still and not thinking about anything. And then all of a sudden something it's just, I know it.
Yeah,
I don't know how I know it. It's just there, right?
Yeah.
And, when we talk about being psychic, there's also this other thing, which is intuition, right? So for me, what I have understood intuition to be for myself, it's like a little bit of I feel things primarily. So
Yeah.
I would get a feeling about a thing or a person. And if I didn't listen to it, I would pay for it later. But so I learned, so it's almost like a little push to it. I don't even have the words. Maybe you can describe intuition better.
Yeah, they're the same thing. Psychic ability and intuition are the same thing. It's knowing from within. Intuition is knowing that comes from within, and it occurs when two things happen. One is you match up with a set of frequencies for whatever reason. Maybe you're curious, maybe it's going to impact you, and it is drawn to you because it's going to impact you in the next week or two. And the other thing is you happen to be paying attention.
Yeah.
A lot of people have so much garbage floating and rolling through that they're not paying attention to the information they're picking up.
Yeah. At some point in my life, I noticed that I thought to myself, I'm not thinking my thoughts. They're just running through me all the time. What is this? And it angered me. And I thought, no, I want to choose what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It's very difficult though.
Yeah. When you decide you're going to choose what you're thinking, eventually, you do attend to that at first and you pay close attention, but eventually you stop thinking altogether. And that's when you live, I could say it's living in a pool of peace. And there's no activity except what you need to know, what you need to understand, and that just comes to you naturally. Again and again and again. And there's no stress in that, or it reduces the amount of stress that you would normally have to an absolute minimum. When you study telepathy and you live in that pool of peace, you understand that you're in this peace, it's quiet, the surface of the pond is absolutely flat and quiet. And then all of a sudden this ripple comes across, and somebody's name or some event or some picture comes with it. That's telepathy right there. And once you learn to recognize that, then you don't have to have absolute utter silence. You just notice, oh, there's a connection happening between me and whoever, so-and-so. And then somewhere in the next few days, almost always that person is going to contact you or reach out to you or something like that. So.
Yes. I've always sort of thought of it or experienced it as everyone is a billboard, and they have a signature, and they have all their history, and I don't see it in my mind's eye, but I feel them. And so I just kind of absorb. I feel like almost like I eat them and I digest them and I know them. I know that sounds kind of weird, but
no, that's not weird at all, because the primary state of existence is feeling. All intuition is feeling and seeing, or feeling and hearing, or sometimes just feeling. And sometimes it's feeling and taste, or feeling and smell. Feeling is primary. So for you to say, I feel it, it's like, yeah, I'll bet you do. So, because that is primary.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I'm thinking of people as they listen to this talk and all, and, a lot of people talk about enlightenment, and it's always some kind of monk sitting on the top of a mountain in Tibet, just meditating all hours of the day. And there's this perception or this idea that you need a guru and all of this. But I'm curious to hear your opinion, because mine is that we really need to live in this world that we're in and be enlightened in everything that we do in our normal reality. Does that resonate?
That's excellent. Enlightenment, the true definition of enlightenment is when you begin to turn into light. Now, if you've never had that experience, that's going to be like, how the heck would that happen? But I have had that experience, and there's some other things I could say about that. But enlightenment is when you begin turning into light. The way that enlightenment is used out there is that it's an intellectual thing, or it's a metaphysical thing, or it's a whole bunch of, spiritual stuff. It's really not. The kind of enlightenment we have here is when we begin to understand the nature of reality, when we see what is. That's enlightenment here in a third dimensional reality system. If you're going to be, I agree with you, 120, 50%, 190%. If you're going to be in a three-dimensional system, then be here. Be physical. Learn to love this. Learn to enjoy this. The intensity of a three-dimensional system is phenomenal. It's wonderful. That's what we're here to learn and to experience. To say that, I'm out of here, you can't get to the higher states from here just magically, period. So you're not just going to ascend out of here. People say, I'm going to transition out of here. And I'm like, do you understand that the word transition means you're going to die? So when do you plan to do this? Do you have your wheels set up? Do you have your, all of your things here?
Well, people think they will just sort of ascend, they call it, and they'll just be in this beautiful heavenly place called 5D. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of like 5G. So I think it's really important for people to understand you have to earn fourth dimensional consciousness, and you have to demonstrate that and live that, and then maybe you'll be invited into a fourth dimensional system if you leave here. However, if you leave here, what I've observed is that I get to the place I call the way station, which is where a lot of people go after death, and they're working to figure out, okay, let me study the life I just had so I can figure out why didn't I get a little further along in my development. And then they line up waiting for a body to come back. And for a long time, I had this sort of an attitude, like a lot of people, well, aren't we going to ascend? But I would go to the way station and I would see all these people talking, or hear them and watch them making their plans for their next life and getting ready to come back. And after a while, it was like, okay, something's not matching here. Yeah. We have this idea that we're going to ascend out of here and all the problems are going to be gone. Yeah. And then I go to the way station and everybody's lined up waiting to come back. Okay, what is it? Finally, after having a number of conversations with my own people, it was like, oh, okay, you have to earn your consciousness. You have to maintain this state of love. You have to maintain this intent to do no harm with your words, with your technology, with your actions, with your money, with your whatever. Everything has to be geared toward the raising of the experience of love and life for yourself and others. And when you can demonstrate that consistently, then you can move into a fourth dimensional consciousness. And or a fourth dimensional system. And I've been really, this last year, working to study what is the difference between 3 and 4 and 5 dimensional existence. And it's all in the consciousness, all of it.
Yeah. So one last topic I would love to ask you about. I watched your Earth series, which was wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And in one of them, you talked about having had an experience where you basically were in the future Earth, or in a new Earth.
Yeah.
And so that's something I've always felt myself, even as a child. I knew that I was here that there was going to be some kind of process and we were going to go to a different place. And so I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about that and maybe leave people with some kind of hope or vision of where we could be.
Yeah. Okay. So, back in the early days of Kundalini, when I wasn't sleeping, in those first 3 years, I had this visit a number of times from this group of 3 beings of light who were fully enlightened. They were bodies of light, and they said, come with us. So I went, and we went to this planet, this place that was absolutely beautiful. And the thing that struck me each time I went was, this is just like the Earth. This is everything I know already. What, how do I get my mind around this? And I had 3 or 4 visits, 3 visits with them, and then 1 visit I went on my own. And it was a place where there was absolute and utter beauty. There was nobody sick. Nobody was crabby. Nobody was overweight. Nobody was anxiously trying to climb the corporate ladder. Everything was telepathic. Everybody was in full communication with everybody, and with the plants and with the buildings. I remember talking to the bricks in this one building. Just an astounding place. So 40 years go by. Maybe not quite 40 years, maybe about 35 or 6 or something like that. In 2018 or 2019, I got an invitation to help build the new Earth. And I was like, okay, I have no idea how to do that. And then in the process of kind of racking my brain, I remembered those 3 visits and thought maybe I could get back to that place. And I found it. And so long story short, I began visiting that reality system. And then a woman that I had met but didn't know very well named Landy Hurd was her name. Now it's Mellis. And she had written a book called Beyond the Sky because she was working with the ETs. And she, I had met her through Dr. Levengood at the lab in Ann Arbor. And she happened to mention that she had been approached by some ETs who said to her, would you help us build a new Earth? And so we started chatting back and forth. And so we started working on this deliberate creation of a new reality system. And so we got to the point where we were told, okay, it's done. Now you just need to bring people here. So we're sitting with that now. I described a few of my visits in the Planet Earth series. And I actually put the book out after that was done, and so people could read it that weren't subscribed on Patreon. And so there's this realization that we're having right now, which is, okay, we ended up creating this reality system, and there are a few people there, and we're like, okay, how do we get the rest of the people there? What's the process? And I'm not sure I've got it, but I'm beginning to see little hints. So the answers that I've gotten are, never mind worrying about how people are going to get there. Just keep teaching people how to expand their consciousness. Keep bringing them back to the place of love and, patience, and be creative and get out of your box and, all this stuff. Understand consciousness, use consciousness. We may end up going through something that is really has to do with the cosmos, and that if that occurs, may change our consciousness, and we may go as a group. Everybody who has worked on consciousness may end up going as a group. And I don't have any details more than that, but and I don't want to sound fantastic, like, oh, that's not possible, because there are certain things that are possible, and there are some things I've seen that are coming in the next decade, maybe by 2026, 27, we're going to be seeing signs of that cosmic event. If that occurs, that's going to be like a supercharged Kundalini event for the whole planet. Wow. If you have had some, at least a little bit of exposure to, come on, expand your consciousness, learn how to use your breath, learn how to use your consciousness as a tool, then I think those people are going to just step right into that new place. And we'll see. It still sounds really fantastic. And I will say this, I have often started out with something that I thought was absolutely impossible. Fantastic storytelling, not real. And then if I just watch, what I begin to see are the 3D steps and the 3D events that make that an option. So I'm not to that point yet where I'm seeing that, but I'm beginning to see, okay, I think this is going to result in a huge number of us being able to go to that new place. So, and there's a lot of consciousness awakening that has to happen between now and then. And I think that the Cabal is doing a fabulous job of waking us up. So.
Yes, they are, aren't they? They're trying to do the opposite, but it's like a rubber band. It's bouncing back and actually awakening.
I know.
This COVID program woke up a whole bunch more people, for example.
Yeah.
So
I know it has, and it's going to continue. When people's lives are on the line, they're going to pay attention, and their lives are on the line now. attitude. I said this to my class last weekend or the weekend before. You know, that silly Klaus Schwab, he thinks he's got it in the bag, and I'll have to say, no, Schwabi, we're going to Schwab the deck with you. So,
Schwabi, I like that. Can I use that? I
yeah,
love
yeah. And he needs to, I think somebody needs to put a meme out there. Hey, Schwab, we're going to Schwab the decks with you. So he's going nowhere.
But you know what you said, I think that's really true. As long as people are comfortable, even if it's a sort of miserable
Yes.
comfort, but
Yes.
there's no motivation, right? But when you're so on the one hand, the cabal has used survival to control us because they understand psychology and the brain. But paradoxically, there's a place where being against the ropes does push you to wake up and begin to take action and change things. And it's my experience. I mean, what I try and tell people is we naturally are who we are. It's just all this crap, all this baggage, all the trauma, so it's almost like we're encased in this clay, and you have to just chip it and break it open and get out of that. And then it's automatic. We'll just be where we should be, right?
That's right. That's right. And we are naturally loving, cooperative people. So, you know, just be what comes natural. And if we can just practice that a little bit, it actually becomes the way that we are. And so we return to our natural state. You don't see that much unless there's a disaster, and then everybody pitches in to help.
Yep. I saw that about 2 years ago, I think it was. I live in the very southern tip of Oregon. And, you know, when the cabal started the fires in California and Oregon, well, they burned through here. I saw the flames from my house. I was terrified. The wind blew away from my house, and so I was spared, but a whole section burned down. And I live in a valley surrounded by some mountains. It's called the Rogue Valley. And all of a sudden, after that event, it wasn't the state, it wasn't the local anything, it was the people. The people all got together, and they had a location where people could go pick up clothing and anything that they needed. Look, I knew somebody. I did a GoFundMe for the guy that is my gardener because their trailers burned down, and they didn't have insurance. Well, there was a family in this area that had 2 houses on their property, and they gave this family their house to live in for 1 year for free. So they could get back on their feet. Yeah. So that was, I experienced that. I thought, oh my God, look at this. We're all stressed. We're all under this heavy cabal fire of everything. And this event happens. That's the beauty and the natural lovingness of the human being. So I have so much hope because I keep seeing that despite everything they've thrown at us, that is our natural instinct.
It is. It is. And I don't know if they're just too stupid to figure that out, or if they're that dense, or if they don't understand. They're lost, and they're,
Well, they don't feel, they're not like us. See, I grew up with these people. They're psychopaths. No. Their heart is not online. They don't have that same feeling that we have, so they don't understand that. And so everything they do, they forget that little piece. It makes no sense to them. And that's, I think, one of our, our salvation.
I agree. The thing that they cannot see, they're going to overlook.
Yes.
And that gives us an edge.
And it's love, that they can't see or understand. And that's what we have so organically. And I think that's why we're going to overcome, go forward.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
So I just want to thank you so much for this conversation that we've had. It's been talk about enlightening. I think this is going to really help a lot of people understand. And, I see you as someone who is living your mission, if I can say it that way.
Yeah.
and I feel so, the thing I'm most grateful for in my life is that I'm living my mission.
Yes. Well. I was going to say, what about you?
So I think everyone is here and has a mission, has something that they came here to contribute to getting us to that new world that you saw.
Yeah, I think that's true. I often think back to the hippies, the hippie thing, and I often think to myself, well, they got started too early, and then they all got old and pooped out. So it's like, come on, you guys, get up out of your rocking chair. It's, it's time for you to do what you actually came here to do. It's about love. It's make love, not war. That kind of thing. So
that's so beautifully said. I think we'll just end it right there.
Okay.
So,
all right. Yeah.
Thank you again so much. And I hope you might be willing to come back and talk a little more about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't even touch on that has to do with consciousness, and that's really wonderful that people could understand how to use it a little better, and feel like they're getting kind of sassy with it, getting into their power. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, and until next time then.
Okay, thank you, and thank you everybody for listening.